Hello, I'm Srividya Sridharan.
And I'm James McQuivey.
Your host for Forrester's podcast, What It Means, where we explore the latest market dynamics impacting executives and their customers. Today, we're joined by Vice President, Emerging Technology and Principal Analyst Brian Hopkins and Vice President and Principal Analyst Ted Shadler to discuss the long-term impact of AI computing. Welcome both.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shri and James. Happy to be here.
I am too. Brian and I have been hammering at this thing for a long time, so super excited to come talk about what we learned and what it means.
Okay, so we're in this interesting moment with AI. There is growing impatience on ROI and proving value. And in some sense, we've seen this story before, with new tech, lots of enthusiasm, and then the reality sinks in. But this is different. This is a different moment that we are in, and we wanted to explore the long-term view of this. So let's dig in a little bit. We launched this report, Change the Interface, Change the World. We chose to look at the long view for AI, the next 10, 15, 20 years. Brian, maybe we'll start with you. Where did we land in terms of that time horizon, and what are we calling this era?
There's a lot of investment, and we see the money pouring into all these AI firms. And people are going to start to ask, why hasn't the world changed? And so we started to ask ourselves, what would the world look like in 20 years? And we had a number of kind of brainstorming sessions just to kind of dream up what that might be and how we might go into describing that to clients. And we landed in a really interesting place. I think, obviously we had some conversations with James McQuivey. Ted was in the room. We had George Colony there, our founder, and we were all thinking about this. And James actually said something that Ted and I went back and brainstormed on a bit, and that it kind of dawned on us. This is the first major interface change, the shift from using our thumbs and fingers to deal with devices, which is the mobile mind shift. This is a book Ted wrote a number of years ago. And that's not the first interface change we've seen since 2008. And now what we think this really is about we're going to start to interact with technology using our voice and natural language in new ways. And that's the first major interface we've changed. And as James pointed out, when you change the interface, that pulls billions of people along with it. And that's what changes business. So that's why we called it Change the Interface, Change the World.
There's a massive backdrop to this just within the last few years of predictive AI and generative AI. And so we had that advantage, if you like, to be able to pull from that brain trust. But we also looked for parallels in history. And one of the parallels that's most obvious, and a lot of people talk about this these days, is the internet itself. And so if you had asked somebody in 1995 what the future of the world was going to look like in 20 years, driven by the internet, you would not have known. You wouldn't have been able to see all of the amazing things that technology created, with lots of pain along the way. I mean, anybody remember the dot-com bubble? So there was a lot of underperformance of potential and a lot of lessons learned and a lot of new concepts and new tech and new behaviors and new protocols and new investment strategies. And most importantly, I think we learned in that era is that we handed people the keys to the kingdom. They had access to the global library of information and increasingly of services of all kinds. Banking, shopping, learning, filing their taxes, you name it. And it set the table for these incredible advances and disruptions in people's lives and how businesses operate. And a lot of businesses did not survive, or they struggled to survive. We saw and see something of that scale unfolding here. And the fundamental difference is that not only do people have access to this library of information, they have access to a library of knowledge and expertise using, as Brian said, their own words. Instead of having to master with their thumbs or their fingers on keyboards and mouse all these intricate commands, if you like, they can just talk. My goal is this. Can you help me with that? What do you know? How do you know it? How can I be convinced that you know it well? Maybe not quite at that level yet, but asking and receiving is the fundamental protocol, communications protocol change that this technology, particularly generative AI technology, enables. And that is what got us excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, 10 years ago, if you say to someone, voice is going to be a big deal. I mean, we at Forrester have been writing about natural user interfaces for a long time, And if someone were to only think you mean, oh, okay, I'm going to replace keyboard clicks or mouse clicks or pushes with my finger with a new command. And now I have to memorize that command like we do with Alexa or other devices. We have to learn what they need us to say and then say it exactly the right way. And if they misunderstand, we repeat it. And you're not talking about that. That's what's so fascinating about this period. And I think what unlocks this opportunity that we're talking about is that the agent, I'm getting ahead of our words, aren't I? The thing on the other side that we're talking to is actually trying to understand us in context. And that's what unlocks so much here, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's what you pointed out, James. Mobile applications were designed in very specific ways and very specific engagement points that the developers had to think of ahead of time by understanding what you wanted and giving you only certain results and outcomes you could get from that app. And this is a different design paradigm where we're actually engaging with these apps or these agents with far less friction, and they're trying to understand and then go solve our problems for us without having all these dead ends and things they can't do. So that's the big difference.
You know, just quickly, it's interesting, Brian. One of the people we talk about what do the new designers have to do? It's not just interface design, it's linguistic design.
Absolutely.
What are their intentions? How should I be interpreting those intentions? How can I build a model, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, to interpret those intentions and give back something useful, meaningful, valuable?
So we talked about the interface being that moment where things have changed. The agents working in the background, maybe we could spend some time on what are these agents? What forms do they take? We've already interacted with many of them through chatbots and other conversational interfaces. Are these the agents we're talking about, or are we talking about more powerful agents? What are these agents?
Yeah, I'll take that one just for a moment. We could talk about this one all day. It's kind of another aha moment in the report. We know, just like we saw with mobile or even internet, when something comes between a brand and their customers, there's a lot of room for disintermediation. And that's where disruptors kind of swoop in and separate you from your customers and then make money off of that. So we ask ourselves, if AI is going to disrupt, how might that disruption happen? And we're already familiar with this idea of an interface. We talk to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and they respond to our questions. And we think of that as the AI you experience. What we're seeing is this trend towards there needing to be some AI behind that interface that's actually trying to accomplish the tasks that you ask it to perform, because as we become more accustomed and dependent on these interfaces, we're going to ask them to do complex things for us. And so that's where the idea of an agent comes in, which is a special kind of AI model or set of models that understands the intent, as Ted said, and goes and tries to accumulate the information, accomplish the task, do some work for us in kind of that principal-agent relationship. And that's just starting. So when you ask what the agents are, realize that most of the AIs, the generative AI models that you're going to start talking to, will have to have AI models behind them, the agent models that actually have a set of tools and the ability to try to understand what it is that you want and go get it done. And then they will communicate to you through the agent. So when I think of agents and interfaces, what I think of is a new kind of architecture of applications where smart, intuitive interfaces are communicating with us in natural language and coordinating with a set of agents to get that work done. It's going to separate brands from customers. And that separation is going to open the door for a lot of disruptors to create AI native business models and build platforms and services that come between us, our clients and their customers. And that creates an enormous kind of bubble for disruption. So when I think about agents, that's what I think of.
You're someone who thinks at the level of architecture. I imagine a lot of people in our audience do that as well. But let me bring it down to someone my level, a little simpler. So in an old world, I went into a store and I said, I need help finding the right shirt for an upcoming event. And there was an agent of the organization, the person who works in the store, the retail sales associate. They would help me do that. I would get the shirt, I'd be happy. And at the end of the day, I would say, wow, that individual really helped me and represented the brand well. You're now talking about an agent that is independent of the organization. It is not someone who speaks well for the brand. They may answer my question by giving me the shirt that is perfect for me, but I don't walk away saying, wow, that retail brand solved my problem and gave me what I needed. No, the agent did. I mean, you're describing a new player, and I say player cautiously because that's not what you're describing. I don't want to embody these things too much, but you're describing a new player in here. And like you say, that creates that opportunity for disruption at scale. That's the thing here. It's not one app that I use that interposes between me and the brand I would shop at. No, this is a layer of readily available agents for any transaction in any area that I need to accomplish something. And I think that that's grasping the implications of that. Well, hopefully that's what we're going to talk about here today.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure we'll know for another couple of years exactly how far that can go in disrupting business.
You may have your own personal agent that's trained and tuned to your wants and needs and how you shop, assuming somebody builds that agent and you actually can trust it. And then each brand may have an agent built to negotiate with consumer agents. So this agent to agent, brand agent to consumer agent, and how those agents work together to create win-win relationships and grow businesses, that's the big unknown.
Okay, let's take a quick break.
Last year, Forrester predicted that legal action over privacy protections would strike a major data provider. And in 2024, 2 large firms have already settled major privacy claims. That's the power of Forrester's predictions. Want to find out what's coming in 2025? Head to forrester.com/predictions today.
So, big impact in this new world of interfaces and agents. Let's dig a little bit deeper, tackle some of the stakeholders, humans, people, employees, customers. We already started talking about that. Enterprises, Ted, you talked a lot about knowledge, and your colleague Julie Moore has written a lot about this as well. And then tech markets, right? These 3 big stakeholder groups, if you will, are going to be impacted by AI computing. So let's start with humans and individuals. And, it's a big bucket there, consumers, employees, leaders. Over the next 10, 15 years, what are some of those big changes that we can expect to see with humans who are going to take advantage of interfaces and agents?
Well, let me maybe tee up a question to focus that in first. Do consumers in the end, do they have to become smart about how to use this smart technology, or can they just be dumb about how to use this smart technology? Do they get a lot of benefits with almost no effort? Or is this the more effort you put in, the more benefit you're going to get? I don't know the answer.
Wow, that tees it up tight. Let me take a quick swing, Brian, here. So the question is, we don't know. I don't prefer that word that you used just a moment ago about someone's self-actualization and being able to control. But I do think that it's a different set of skills. I think consumers will have to know which agents they can trust. They will have to build confidence that they are being fairly represented, so that when they ask for what they're looking for, they have confidence that that self-agent, that digital twin, is representing their interests. And we do this all the time in our lives. When we pick up the phone and talk to a quote unquote expert, we find out whether we think they're really an expert in what we're asking them for help with, whether it's a travel service or booking a restaurant table or shopping or anything that's more complex than that, like in the medical realm. So that kind of skill of knowing what to trust and how to use your words to gauge your confidence in their ability to help you, I think that's a new skill. It's one of the things that we do well as humans. We've sort of forgotten how to do them when we talk to machines, we talk to computers. I think we will reacquire that skill.
Absolutely. Just like consumers, as consumers, we'll need to reacquire the skill for exactly what Ted said. How do we trust these things? What can they do for us? I think it's even more acute. And I know, James, you have a whole group working on this right now, but what does the work look like when we're doing this? And how do we become, the word I think we came up with in the research, we use in the research is AI advantaged, right? What will that AI advantage future look like for your workers and also for your executives? And I think, let me give you just an example in the executive space. You can even see it today. You can look this up online. There's this AI called Aiden Insight. And Aiden Insight is an AI being joint developed by the Group of 42 and Microsoft. And the Abu Dhabi's International Holding Company has appointed it as an observer in their board. And what Aiden does is listens to everything that's happening in a board meeting and has access to years and years of financial performance and business data, and can actually offer up insights, process all that information, and participate in that board as an observer. I mean, this is really early days stuff, but that's the exact example of a company whose executives are going to be AI advantaged in the future. And this won't be kind of a one-off and a prototype, but it's like if you're going to be a business that's a leader in the future, you're going to need these kind of capabilities, and they can dramatically change how rapidly a business can adapt to changing business circumstances and pivot their strategy ahead of non-advantaged companies. I know as a personal example, I've spent some time after we wrote this report, and I thought, well, maybe I should be AI advantaged. So I went out and started using ChatGPT to help me learn to code in Python in a notebook and do analytics. And can write hundreds of lines of code for me now to create some very sophisticated analytics that I can run in a Jupyter notebook. Never could do that before. But one of the things I learned in that is you have to know how to talk to these models. And you also have to know which model to use, because maybe one model can't solve a problem, but another one can. And you have to know when these models get confused, because they will get confused today's state. I spent some time playing with OpenAI's new Strawberry release because it's specifically optimized for coding tasks. And it's very, very good at solving some problems that previous generations of the models can't solve right now. But it also gets confused in very special ways. And the only way you can learn this is to start working with these things and learn how to talk to them like you would any other kind of colleague, as it were, in your workforce. That's how I'm starting to think of it.
So what I'm hearing is trust building. There's no substitute for that. It's going to be a journey to build that trust, whether it's employees, consumers, and there's no substitute for experimentation, right? And raising that AIQ for the organization and for employees. So to create AI advantaged employees, consumers, and leaders, what would be your advice? What should they prepare now? What should companies do now so that we are helping these stakeholders be ready?
Oh, we've written a lot about this. Simplistically, the way that we've thought about it is we know there's a lot of BYO AI, so bottom up. And this is classic in tech adoption inside companies. We have some enthusiasts and very early adopters that are bringing the solutions directly to the company. That's bottom up. The companies respond with top down, and we're seeing that, of course, through Microsoft's Copilots and Salesforce's new Agentforce and ChatGPT for enterprise, and Brian mentioned one just now. So there are many, many sort of sponsored or approved, if you like, applications, and that has to happen. The two have to meet in the middle. We need to have employees be training each other and training themselves and being trained and having the commitment. Some professional service firms, for example, are spending tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, learning and development dollars on AI skills. So that's one. And then kind of thinking about how to get technology well used. We know lots of those techniques. We know about employee journeys. We know about how to improve processes. We know about human-centered design. All of these things we've learned before apply in this world where we're bringing employees along through that journey to be utilizing, using, taking advantage of these technologies.
Ted, what I like about what you did in there was you really led us from, okay, how are we going to change the way people work to, the enterprise is going to have to take the lead here. There are things that enterprises at the top have to decide about how they're going to approach it, how they're going to structure this opportunity in order to make sure they take advantage of what is sitting right in front of them, really. So, okay, let's turn to the enterprise for real then and talk about over this time period. We got 5, 10, 15 years, and hopefully that sets us up for beyond 15. A key part of the impact on these companies is their ability to harness the knowledge that they currently have or that they're going to generate here, explicit and tacit knowledge as well? I know this is an important part of the way you thought about it. Tell us more about how we do that at the enterprise level.
Absolutely. This kind of goes back to some work that Ted and I did back in 2015, where we talked about systems of insight and the insight loop, where we really defined it was about data to insight through analytics to action. And then we realized you could measure that action, and that provided more data to get more insight. And you go round and round that loop, and the better you got, the more data you had, the more insight you had, and hopefully the more successful you were. And that's where we published on this idea of a system of insight. So that was in the back of my head when we went into this. But the key epiphany, one of the first ones that Ted and I had, was this is not about turning data into insight. This is about turning an enormous amount of captured data, databases, documents, and knowledge, like what your people knew, what was on those notes and those client interactions that never got recorded. How do you turn all that knowledge how do you put it to work, right? And so the epiphany that I had is it's really the AI model and the act of training that model or tuning or grounding that model that turns all this stuff that you have into something useful that you can go do something with. And so the word that we hear being used in industry is knowledge. So what goes in is data, training data, and what comes out of the models is knowledge, but that knowledge has to be put to work in an application that actually does something for someone that they find useful. So then the idea that we had, and I kind of drew this circle out, is I said, well, once you have that application that's helping, say, your employees be better employees, and you're freeing up their time where they don't have to do the drudgery of drudgery parts of their job, is you free up their time to learn things and actually become smarter in working with this AI-powered software. So to close that loop, you actually have to go spend time harvesting what they're learning and what they know, harvesting all that knowledge, connecting it with your databases and your software systems and all that enterprise stuff, feeding that back into your set of available training data in something we call a knowledge graph. And then that training data then feeds the next generation of those models that make your humans smarter, and around the knowledge loop you go. And so the epiphany here is, what if we could tell firms how to build these knowledge loops that accelerate them into the future because their models are getting smarter, their humans are becoming more AI advantaged, and that's making them smarter and more successful. So from there, once we kind of had that epiphany, then we went into a whole lot of other, like, well, what does that mean, and how do you do it? And how is that going to impact enterprises?
That progression, I think, is really amazing and really important because, of course, people have a lot today already. They can start today. And one of the things that's happening with the latest generation of both models and applications built on those models is using your own data, using your own knowledge, ingesting your own. I just saw one today that I'm fascinated by. Somebody on Hugging Face posted on Hugging Face a model that is trained on the U.S. Army field manuals. So that massive volume of public data on how to be a soldier, I guess, is now in a model. That kind of model building can happen today. Now you can interrogate that application. You can say, can you help me with this? And what should I do there? And. So take that idea, play it out as Brian just described in this ever value increasing, this viral loop of knowledge capture and deployment. And that leads to a tremendous number of actions for an enterprise today and going forward. They need to find that knowledge. This is where Julie Moore's work is so important around knowledge management and the perspectives that we've inherited from that technology toolkit, but then opened up and applied not for control purposes, but for harvesting, building those knowledge graphs, building those models, building the applications on the models, recognizing that companies have hundreds of pockets of expertise, domains in their company that are proprietary and unique that they can take advantage of. They can develop more fully and further. And this is where the step one in the enterprise journey really takes place, is how do I identify, inventory, capture, grab that knowledge so I can use it to train, whether it's RAG or some other vector embedded approach or custom model. Increasingly, it'll be a custom model, so I can take advantage of it and use it. So capture the knowledge, deploy the knowledge, use the knowledge, identify more knowledge. The second step is really around tacit knowledge, as Brian said, what's in people's heads and their conversations and all those documents that are not formally captured. That's tacit in the sense that you haven't written it down somewhere, you haven't found it. But if you can find it carefully, because employees' feelings and in some cases in countries' rights need to be protected, but to pull that tacit knowledge out into this same loop. And Brian said something really important I want to reinforce, which, and this was all you, Brian. I was like, wow, that's so cool. You have to tie it to something meaningful. It's not random knowledge. It's tied to a customer or a purchase, a transaction, or a protocol for whatever it is. It's tied to enterprise data. It is not just a random collection of stuff. And that's what makes it actionable and useful in this environment. So that's really where it starts. And then from there, we build out the toolkit, and we can talk more about it.
Well, I want to hear about agents, because I feel like you're laying the foundation for the enterprise to now start thinking explicitly about, where am I making agents? What happens there? Who does that? How do they do it? Make an agent come to life in the enterprise that does what Ted just told us.
I just had a chance to talk with one of our clients, ServiceNow. They make the IT help desk software, and they're using, like many tools are of that ilk today, they're using generative AI to create knowledge articles once they solve a problem. So you come in, you do a help desk. I have a sticky problem. Your IT help desk agent, human, helps you solve the problem. Out of that solution, the system automatically creates a knowledge article, which goes into their kind of internal knowledge management repository for how that problem got solved. Back to what Ted said now, though, the linking that knowledge article to the elements of your IT architecture that got impacted, to your employees, to key business processes that are impacted by use of that piece of IT equipment. That's a knowledge graph. And that knowledge graph, there's special databases that can do this, but don't think about the database. Just think about the conceptual idea of having all this linked knowledge and enterprise data in process so that you can train and tune and ground those models that you're building. And that gets to your question. Now, the idea here, I think, in the future is instead of solving so many problems with humans, using these knowledge articles tied to your process data, you can actually begin to build help desk software agents that can be your first order of support, because they will be smart enough to ingest the knowledge articles about how things got solved, go actually get the solutions done, and then communicate back to your employees using those AI interfaces, those natural language interfaces. That doesn't mean you're going to lay off help desk people. In fact, you probably have too few help desk people to begin with. But you're going to take the humans that you have on your help desk, you're going to move them up the stack. They're going to get smarter and smarter, and you're going to begin capturing more and more of how they're really helping your organization move forward, which is what you want them to do anyway, because they know your IT stack and the problems everyone has better than anybody else. So the actual software agents begin to help the human agents as you accelerate around that loop.
Yeah, and somewhere along all of this is the underlying premise that knowledge sharing is a good thing. And I think fundamentally, investing time, resources on creating that culture of knowledge sharing, whether it's with an agent or a human, I would imagine that's the ingredient of all of this to happen.
And just not possible at scale before, right? I mean, if you could make the case that knowledge is this important to the organization before, many have, but it's never been something that you could extract at scale before and then deploy the utility thereof at scale. And I think AI computing does that for us.
I think AI computing does, and I think I want to tie it back into this empowerment and the agents that empower people. Tying it back to Brian's example, which I think is a good one. There are two empowerments happening there. One is for that IT help desk person who is now empowered to do more important things. That's great. That frees up the grunt work, the mundane stuff to do more interesting things. That's a hugely human beneficial contribution. That's one source of empowerment. The second source of empowerment is that the individual getting help through that help desk. It could be true in a call center. Of course, it is true in a call center, they are also empowered. They can serve themselves on their time, in the time and place and device they want to use. They're not waiting on hold, right? So this idea of self-service and being self-actualized, if you like, in control of your own destiny by offloading the grunt work to an agent, a software AI agent in this case, that's what lies ahead.
Sri, it feels like we got to go to tech markets because that's a big unanswered question so far in our conversation. What do we need to know about that?
Well, clearly where information, data, everything lives is within the cloud, within the databases. We've talked a lot about where that currently that data sits. And I imagine in the era of AI computing, that needs to change too. So in the next 10, 15 years, what are we talking here? What are we talking in terms of impact on the software market, specifically the data market, the cloud market, the AI infrastructure market? Something's got to change to be able to either prepare for this future or accelerate it.
Yeah. And this was probably one of the most fun parts of the report because we had a chance to collaborate with all of our other expert analysts in all these fields. And they came up with some great ideas. It kind of added to the things that we were seeing. A couple of things we talked about, I think that were really interesting is we already see the CRM and the ERP and the big package vendors understand the impact that generative AI is having. They have their strategies for it. There's been a lot around Salesforce agents rolled out. But each of these companies also realizes that the fundamental question is this: if I can build an application that is generally intelligent with a number of agents to accomplish tasks that I give that agent and train that agent on, and it can communicate with other agents in your enterprise or other humans, can I build a package that does customer relationship management and enterprise resource planning? Why do I need to have two separate, huge, expensive packages of software that I pay for and maintain? So we see a lot of disruption coming to the enterprise software market. Another place that we saw a disruption, and this was Michelle Getz had this idea. Her idea, and I've kind of seen this, is the fact that the fundamental nature of data changes. See, today data is tables of stuff. You have it in databases. But what if your models could, when we think about a model, right, especially a Gen AI or a neural network model, it's nothing more than weights and biases, billions of them, parameters of the neurons in the network. What if those parameters became the data that got shared? Why would we be storing all this stuff in all these databases? And there are dozens or hundreds of vendors in the tech markets that have made their bank on building complex data management stacks and databases. But when the data becomes the parameters of the model and the software is embedded in the model, you're building software in terms of knowledge and neurons, and the nature of software is changing and the nature of data is changing, that's going to change the technology markets. And all the tech vendors understand this. It's just a question of who's going to win and who's going to get ahead and what our enterprise is going to really glom onto. And timing is everything.
And we do make some calls on that. Maybe we won't try to spill all the beans in that table. But these forces at work that Brian's talking about are manifest today, certainly in the announcements that the providers are making and how Wall Street's assessing the value of those companies. And so the AI compute layer, right, chips and whatnot, there's a big thing going on. Brian, you might want to talk about that. At the hyperscaler sort of hosting layer, there's a lot going on. And so Microsoft and Google, for example, are building their own chips, so they're not reliant on NVIDIA because they're going to host these basic compute models. Then there's an orchestration layer, and there's actually a lot in that layer around agentic model interactions. There's a lot about hosting applications. There's a lot about hosting proprietary or domain-specific or enterprise-specific models. So there's a lot of competition going on at the hyperscalers. And then at the top layer of these applications, and Brian alluded to some big enterprise categories, those enterprise app vendors, they also want to own the models. So the battle is happening at every layer of the stack.
Absolutely. There's an awful lot being made right now about who has the GPUs, right? In fact, even Andreessen Horowitz, the VC firm, is handing GPUs out to their portfolio of companies as an enticement to get some of these startups who are having a hard time getting GPUs because the cloud vendors have all these agreements with NVIDIA. but that really opens the door. I mean, what does this future look like? And we think, one of the three big cloud vendors is going to make a misstep here. And, maybe Oracle Cloud Infrastructure with a bunch of GPUs it's been hoarding steps into one of those missteps and has a more prominent role in the kind of AI cloud native future.
I like where we're going already because it's prediction season and we are in predicting mode. Clearly we all had the privilege, I would say, to spend a lot of time thinking through the 10, 15, 20 years. There were a lot of ideas that we generated throughout the process. What didn't make it into the report as our predictions? Anything that comes to mind?
One of the things I actually believe will happen, and building on what Brian said, is I think we're actually buying a lot of the equivalent of dark fiber. So buying GPUs that you can't monetize is a really bad investment. And that's what's happening. And so dark fiber went through this when everybody paid to lay fiber optic cable to power the original internet, and then they didn't use them. For decades, they didn't use them. So they spent all this capital and they laid all this fiber and they didn't use it. I suspect that because of the lack of immediate economic gain from these deployed Gen AI models in real companies, helping customers, empowering employees, that we will have this backlash where we don't actually light up and use all those GPUs.
Can I throw one out that a name that came up often in our discussion, even back with George Colony, Amazon. This is a company that some people love to say is going to fail tomorrow, and some people say is going to be around forever. What happens to Amazon in this environment?
At the bottom of the stack for Amazon is their compute infrastructure, and they've played a very different game than has Google or OpenAI with Microsoft backing it. They are very intent on owning the shovels and the blue jeans, if you like, that the miners will use. So they don't need to build a really expensive, what Mike Walteri believes, and I agree, are highly commoditized high-end models. They don't need to do that. That costs a lot of money. They do need to host any model that wants to get built. And that's what I mentioned Hugging Face earlier. That's a protocol. They've got a whole thing. So at the bottom of the stack, I think they're going to do quite well. And they will also build chips. I think probably already are. So they'll do fine there. It's at the orchestration layer where they've actually put in some pretty big plays already, ahead of even Microsoft in some ways, I believe, which will give them an advantage at the application tier where these models are going to live.
The thing I wonder when we're talking about AWS is, I think, and this again is not of next few years, but in the 5, 10, 15-year view, the demand for running these AI models, not training, but running these AI models everywhere, I just think that demand will exceed the capacity of any three businesses, no matter how big they are. And that opens the door, I think, for instance, content delivery network providers are busy converting their points of presence into AI inferencing cloud AI data centers, as are the telcos. So I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on the big three hyperscalers, including AWS. And are they going to be able to meet that demand, or will AI data centers everywhere by a bunch of different vendors really grow so fast that the three hyperscalers can't keep up? But I'm more interested, and I want to hear James's opinion about the consumer aspect, right? I mean, AWS has all this data. How are they going to use it to their advantage?
You used a very interesting word, the gravity well.
Yeah, the thing about, if you think about the way to visualize what's happening is it's a little invisible, just like gravity, but the effects of gravity are obvious. We can all watch it. And Amazon is a gravity well. It's not only companies that can have a gravity well. It can be around a particular social experience or around some other event, but Amazon is a gravity well. It has pulled consumers into a set of behaviors that are very consistent with what Amazon wants to do. But more importantly than that, as a result, it has pulled in their data. And that data converted into knowledge, the way you are all describing it here, gives them a tremendous advantage, because not just Google style or Microsoft style, we know who you are, we have a few demographic data points about you. We know, in some cases, 25 years of shopping history, search history, what you looked at, what you didn't look at. Convert that into knowledge. Now I have the perfect AI agent for James. And that's what you were describing before. You'll have that that AI agent that represents that consumer, Amazon could turn that on for 100 million people tomorrow.
Yeah, for buying stuff.
For buying stuff, absolutely. Not for doing everything in their lives.
But they're trust challenged. And I was the one in the report who put them in the disadvantage column because them and Meta have a trust issue that Apple doesn't have. So I think that they could do that, but will they do enough to win consumers' trust so that they succeed as we move forward?
So on that bold note, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm certainly excited to enter and be a part of this AI computing era. Thank you all for joining. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Brian. And thanks, James.
Exciting times.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thank you.
If you like what you heard today, subscribe to Forrester's What It Means podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. To continue the conversation, follow Forrester on LinkedIn or drop us a note at podcast@forrester.com. Thanks for listening.